Hey everybody, I'm going to do a 30-day review on everything we've covered so far in the 40-day challenge. The private videos are available to those doing the 40-day challenge only. So this will just be the cliff notes of the things that we've gone over so far in the 30 days. And then in the last 10 days, I am going to do just one video that'll be about 30 minutes long, and that will be mostly on exercise, talking about high intensity interval training, strength training, and principles revolving around the topic at hand, which is weight loss, and not just weight loss, how to keep the weight off, and not just how to keep the weight off, how to maintain as much lean body mass as possible while you take that weight off, which is harder to do than many people think. Let me just remind everybody as we go through this review, the reason why diets don't work, and this may sound so cliche, but let me explain what that means based on the evidence. 95% of people will put all of the weight back on and more within 3 years that diet. So if you took 100 dieters, I'm dieting. It doesn't matter what diet they're following. It does not matter, keto, cookie diet, croissant diet, whatever. 95 of those 100 people will be the same weight or heavier in 3 years. And within 6 months, more than 50% of them will be the same weight or heavier. Diets don't work. Guys, I've been going through the past 30 days explaining how and why that is and how to reverse that, because it all does simply come down to behaviors. Let me reverse engineer my conversation. The last thing we went over was genetics and epigenetics. And certainly that plays a role. So the last thing I went over the last 10 days has more to do with the genetic factors. And I reminded everybody that there's a difference between SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms in your genetics. We all have these. Please don't get confused at the big word. Let me just explain that these are the genetic variations that we have. There are some people that have genetic mutations, which are much more rare. So leaving those aside, and it doesn't matter, by the way, like the SNPs and the genetic mutations that we see in obesity work the same way. And they work on a hormone called leptin, which signals to the body that basically you're full. I mean, does everybody understand that? We don't have to go super crazy, stupid sciencey here. And what we see in these SNPs is that in some people, these clusters of SNPs, because there's many more than one, there's up to 250 of them that are being studied, that this signal maps onto overeating. Okay, it's as simple as that. Are there nuances here and all these things that we can go down rabbit holes? Yes, but at the end of the day, the reason why we see in some people these SNP clusters, they don't feel full as quickly. So it maps onto overeating. This makes sense. And you may say, well, why is that? Well, evolutionarily, it makes complete sense. Remember, for the past several 100,000 years, as human beings, we ate when the food was plentiful, and we would purposely overeat because we didn't know when our next meal was coming. It makes complete sense that we evolved these genetics. However, now there's food everywhere you look. And this leads into my epigenetic argument here. And when we talk about epigenetics, we can talk about many things. We can talk about, and by the way, this is all in my book, one of the greatest books ever written, Chasing 22. Maybe I'm being facetious, but it does explore this concept of free will. And one of the things I talk about here in that book is the arguments about how much genetics shapes our behavior. And it can start in your mother's womb. And what happens over the course of populations, for example, that have had famine or post-traumatic stress disorder while the fetus was in the mother's womb, the predictability of how much that person will likely suffer crazy anxiety or if they're going through famine, those children growing up with markers that tend toward obesity is unbelievable. Those two are epigenetic factors. But regardless of what the circumstance of what was happening while you were in your mother's womb, we still have to live life. And doesn't it make sense to have an arsenal of scientific understanding to not be a victim of your genetics? Holy cow, Tom, that makes so much sense. Okay, well, if we know how these genes specifically right now, talking about overeating, if we understand, right? So if we placed in front of people, let me give you a just quick understanding. Do you notice the epidemic? I was a school teacher for almost 20 years. Do you notice the epidemic of ADD in this country, in children and adults? It's unreal. But let me ask you, how many classes have any of you or your children taken on how to pay attention, how to meditate, how to do things that scientifically map onto the ability to hold on to the sound of somebody's voice? Zero. Well, similarly, how many morbidly obese people have really been exposed to the information that I've been putting out for the past 30 days? The answer is almost none of them. And again, to briefly review here, and again, this is bastardizing the topics here, but we're essentially living in an energy surplus, right? There's food everywhere. It's in your break rooms because it's always somebody's birthday. Somebody just had a kid. Somebody just got promoted. You know, it's tax season, so we have to make sure we have pizza, for the next 4 months in a row, from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. It goes on and on. It's not just what's in your home, because the number one rule that we started off with, if it's in your home, you're going to eat it. But if I get rid of it, then little Bobby's not going to have his Pop-Tarts for breakfast. And what are we going to do? This type of reasoning is exactly the problem. And it's exactly part of the predictions of epigenetic factors that make children overweight. And one of the things that we went over is, once somebody gets overweight, how difficult it is to reverse engineer that weight from a youngster. Because once these fat cells get bigger and bigger and bigger, reversing that becomes much harder, okay? So again, the environment is everything, and controlling that environment really, really matters. So making sure that you fill your pantry with the things, and those of you doing the 40-day challenge got the 200-something page UTC manual, full color details with shopping lists and everything to eat and all kinds of stuff. That too is just the cliff notes of bigger topics that we talk about in seminars, not on videos. So what is it that we need to do? Well, we talked about you need to increase your protein. We talked about why protein is so important. We talked about the controversies with protein, and is it deleterious to your kidney function? And what is it about protein synthesis and how to maximize it? What hampers protein synthesis? We talked about higher fiber diets and why fiber matters so much, and who shouldn't follow a high fiber diet if you have certain things going on with your gut. And we talked about making sure that you eat equal amounts of carbs and fats. But then we got very detailed about what types of fats you should be eating and why, specifically omega-6s and omega-3s, and specifically what to avoid, specifically linoleic acid, which is omega-6. And then we talked more about NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That means that you find ways to stand instead of sit. You find ways to walk instead of stand. You find ways to take the stairs instead of, you get the idea. Instead of parking in the handicapped parking spot, or as close to it as possible, you park across the parking lot in order for you to just walk a little bit more. These things make a big difference over time. Just getting up off your couch to do things in the kitchen during a commercial really matters. And by the way, some of those things could be actually preparing your meal instead of eating out every single night, which contributes heavily to the obesity epidemic, because guys, restaurants don't care about what your diet is or what you're trying to avoid, or polyunsaturated fats or any of those things. They don't care about linoleic acid or omega-3 ratios. They don't care about the fact that you're trying to eat higher protein, higher fiber. They don't care. If you don't have control of what you're putting in your mouth, please don't expect to reverse what we're trying to reverse here. You're just going to be a victim of your genes and your environment. That's just the bottom line. That's why 95% of people fail. We talked very specifically about purposeful exercise. We talked about sleep and the temperature in the room when you sleep and how important sleep is, not just for weight loss, but for brain function, for metabolic markers. We talked about digestion. I sent videos on both of these things. In fact, sleep had 2 videos, digestion had another video that I did separately. Those are actually available on YouTube if you want to watch them. And then, of course, the last thing we're going to be talking about is going to be specifically your lean mass, because the most thermogenic thing on your body is muscle. So we need to be able to preserve as much as possible as we diet down slowly and over time. Slowly and over time. We must diet down slowly and over time. So that was another thing that we delved into. Why slowly and over time? Why it has to be behavioral? Why it has to be a lifestyle? Why it's all about, again, habits, behaviors. It has to become automatic. So that is an encapsulation of the past 30 days. If those of you doing the coaching, if you've missed any of that, I encourage you to go back and look at the specific days and listen to those specific topics, because obviously the devil is in the details. I will be putting out another video. Like I said, instead of doing 10 videos, I'm going to do 1. That seems to be what people want. So that's what I'll do. And I will go into great detail in these last 10 days talking about diet, talking about exercise and high intensity interval training, hormones, best way to do it, the science as always. And guys, last but not least, let's give it up for the bicep one last time. All right, everybody, have a good rest of the day.